All right, we're going to talk about the tangible object cards. I wanted to give just a little bit of history before we get into how to use them. I know, Glenn, you know a lot of the history here, but the original set was put together, developed by Speech and OT of our local school district. They had put together an object card set for an autistic child who wasn't ready for symbols at this point, they felt, and it was very successful. And the child was moving on to a different classroom, and the original teacher wanted to keep the set of object cards, so they went to develop another one and couldn't find the same objects. So it was like starting over. So then they wrote a grant and put together 30 sets for the school district. And so that everybody in the district who was at that object level would be using the same objects. They originally came to us about adding voice output, and I'll talk about that a little later. And we had some options for them, and we started showing the cards at shows, and people liked them, and that just morphed into us developing and adding on to the system. And that's where we got to today. So now I want to talk about how we develop this set. People at the booth, and these are like the most common questions asked at the booth. Is there research behind it? Well, we tried to look at research that was out there. There wasn't a lot. But the things we did glean from that, we did put into the development of this system. And what there was, people always ask, well, how did you pick the vocabulary? Well, there were a lot of people who had done surveys. What vocabulary would you want, and what would you use to represent it? What object? So we started with that. And that's when we developed our core, or our basic set of 20, and then the supplemental sets. We kind of categorized them. With the onset and the research into core words, because a lot of this was done before core words were originally popular, and I'm going to talk a little more about core words later as well, but then we looked at adding on to the core words. The other big thing that was in the research is that an object is just an object. So in other words, this is the cup I use to drink. For it to become a symbol for drink, that's when you mount it. A symbol needs a boundary, and that's why they are mounted. That's to differentiate. This is the cup I use to drink, and this is the symbol for drink. So we had to pick a size that would accommodate an object, and we thought it was important to accommodate like a visual cue of the symbol, a 2D visual cue. And so that's kind of where the size came. It also continued to fit well on our large pal pad, which at that time was one of the only alternatives for voice output. This was before ProxPad. So that's where the size came from. But that whole thing about boundary is really important, that this is now a symbol. And people always said, what do I do with it? You do with it whatever you do with a symbol. It can be a communication symbol. It can be a part of a visual schedule. It can be choice making. It can be whatever you use your symbols for. These are symbols. The other thing, people get overwhelmed when they see the display, And they are like, well, where am I going to put all these? Because we have them set up, on a backdrop. And it's like, you would probably never use them like that. If kids are at that object level, you're going to be presenting 2 or 3 at a time. Now, we do have teachers who display them are in a big group like that so that they're easily accessible. But for the child, you're probably not going to have more than 3 or 4 at most presented at one time. And so that isn't a huge issue. I think people just get overwhelmed. The other thing I want to reiterate right at the beginning is that when these were developed, they were developed for kids with autism, at that level, at a preschool level where they're not identifying pictures yet. They were not initially developed for visually impaired. Now, we have had good feedback for people who work with kids with visual impairment, in that we tried to keep them tactile, and easily recognized objects. But that was not the original intent. And you're going to get people, especially at that OT conference. OTs are more into vision things than speech in general. And you're going to get, well, that's not a good visual. And it's like, that's not the group it was originally intended for. Now, we did just write an article for Closing the Gap this past fall, which kind of outlines how you can adapt them and use them more individualized for kids with like CVI. But that's a whole nother topic. As far as the visual cue, the thing we always want to point out is you can use them with or without the visual cue. There are kids that adding that visual cue is just too much visual clutter. And if they're not at this level yet, you take it off. Don't order it. Now, we use symbol sticks, you know that. But a lot of people use the Boardmaker symbols. We do sell blank of the symbol cards so that you can add your own symbol. You can get them in black and white, which a lot of people don't order, but I think we need to make more people aware that color can interfere and all of that. And so there is a black and white alternative as well. The other thing on our website, we do have resources as far as other things you can do with these cards. For example, if this is still way too much visual clutter on there with the big bold print, we have a reference to like an Avery label that will completely black that out so you can't see through. I always tell people, we assigned a meaning to the cards, but you can change that meaning. And that's why a lot of people, if they're going to change the meaning, would maybe cover up this word and put something different on there. For example, a lot of people will use the TV card for the iPad. We have a whole list of like alternative meanings that people have told us about as far as using it for something different. So I think that's important. There are, I'm trying to think. Voice output, adding the Braille instead. Again, some people want to cover that up, but we've put Braille tape on both this card or the Braille on the card here. You can add that as well as your cue. So a lot of people like that. I'm trying to think. Before I get into, let me just check my use as a symbol. Oh, we also sell blank cards with pre-drilled holes in them so that people can add to this and individualize it and keep it in that same format. Again, we talked about the importance of the importance of that boundary. And so if they become familiar with a boundary, people often, not often, sometimes comment, well, you know, for kids with visual impairment, the zip ties, you know, impede how it really feels. Yep, it does. That is something, and you have to teach that as well. And so, but it's no different than the fact that they're mounted, and even Printing House for the Blind objects or their little system are mounted. So it does feel different than this. This feels different than this because you can't get all the way around. So it's just, yep, you have to mount them some way. And we don't get complaints about them being secured and people, you know, pulling them off or breaking them. That's not an issue. The other thing about the plastic cards is they're easily wiped off and sanitized and that kind of thing, because that's important. You will find anybody coming to the booth who's tried to do it themselves are like, oh wow, yes, this is worth every penny. Other people who say, well, I'm just going to make my own, they just haven't tried it yet. And again, the importance of keeping it consistent with consistent objects. Sometimes the objects we chose on the card weren't even our first choice, but we had to look for sources where we could keep the object consistent. And so that's a compromise. Nothing's perfect. As far as core words, if you're not familiar, are words that have been researched now, as far as what words develop first and are the most used. And that has been very, very helpful in the development of communication systems. That was always something way back. I've been doing this a long time. We struggled with what vocabulary do we try to represent? And core words, most of the major devices have now bought into the whole core word thing, and most of their systems are based on core words. Boardmaker has a really nice set of core word books and curriculum that go along, and they have like prioritized which, like, go is the first word to develop and then more, and they have it in that kind of order. The problem is most of them are verbs, and everyone always says, well, those are hard to represent tangibly, 3D wise. So what we did, Kelly Fonner was working with a group, and they came up with a list of their top 13 needs of core words. We added yes and no to make a 15. So we have 3 sets of core words. What we decided to do, be it right or wrong, is, since the goal with these kids is to get them to that symbol level, moving from tangible to 2D, we looked at, okay, what are the most common symbols used? So for example, the most common used symbol for go is the green arrow. And so we made our core word tangible card a green arrow. And so that's, when you look at the 3 sets of core words, they are geared toward the most commonly used symbol. Some of them more like, again, all based on that symbol. So that's how we developed those core words. There are also core words in the basic set. So in addition to those 15 they gave us, or that we came up with, there's also eat, drink are core words, play, work, read, listen, those are all core words, and so we do have other ones embedded, especially in that core set, or in that our basic set. The other thing, when I talk about alternative meanings, like a core word that I used a lot was want. How do you represent want? Again, when we look at alternative meanings for these, like I use money. Kids understand buying things and wanting things. So this becomes want for me. So that's just an example of, again, using the existing cards for something individualized. Voice output. Let's just talk about voice output. Obviously, the ProxPad I think is great as far as, and that would be my first choice. But again, they do fit nicely onto the PalPad, and we'll talk about PalPads later. You know, just a flat switch. The nice thing about this switch is, where did I put? Oh, here we go. So putting it on the PalPad will activate. Pulling this off.
Yeah, we would have, just sorry to interrupt, but we would have a piece of Velcro to match the Velcro under there.
So pulling it off would activate. So if they're doing something where they listen to a direction, or it gives them a direction and they have to take the card to the next place, adding the visual cue, matching the visual, the 2D to the 3D, that would activate it. So there's some nice alternatives as far as activation and what the child is working on for that as well. Then obviously we have the Lex, which is the one that looks just like the ProxPad, and then the ProxPad. So there's a lot of alternatives, and people say, and in the cases, you're going to find the Bubble Maker has a bubble card on it, and the music player has a music card on it. This is a device we'll talk about later, but this is something that's been used for like visual schedules and things, because you can plug in up to 8. So I can plug in up to 8 of these and maybe put them on the wall as a visual schedule. So as far as voice output, there's a lot of options. So I think that's it. After you guys listen to this, if you have other questions, just let me know. Thanks.